Sarah and Ethan had always been fascinated by the supernatural. When they saw an opportunity to visit one of the most haunted places in America, the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana, they couldn't resist. The plantation had long been known for its eerie reputation, with legends of ghosts, strange happenings, and unexplained occurrences. But Sarah, a passionate historian, was more intrigued by the tales of its haunted past. Ethan, on the other hand, was skeptical about the supernatural, believing it was all superstition and folklore. As they drove up to the plantation, the sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the massive plantation house. Towering oak trees around the house loomed like silent sentinels, their long limbs hanging low, casting shadows on the ground. There was an almost unsettling stillness in the air, broken only by the faint chirping of crickets. Is it just me? Does this place look a little too perfect? Sarah mused as she gazed at the grand estate. I think it's the creepy stories getting to you, Ethan replied with a chuckle. Relax, we're just here for the history, right? Sarah smiled, though she couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping over her. Myrtles Plantation wasn't just any historical site. It was a place rumored to be haunted by the spirits of former slaves, murdered children, and a vengeful ghost named Chloe. Sarah refused to let the stories get to her. She was here to uncover the truth, no matter how eerie it seemed. They checked into the guest quarters, an old cottage that had been converted into a room for visitors. It was charming, but there was something about it that felt off, an oppressive heaviness in the air, as if the walls were holding onto something dark and forgotten. As the evening settled, Sarah and Ethan ventured out to explore the plantation grounds. The mansion's whitewashed walls glowed faintly under the moonlight, and the sound of rustling leaves seemed to follow them wherever they went. Guide, an old caretaker named Thomas, greeted them with a warm smile, but his eyes seemed haunted, like he'd seen things he couldn't explain. You're brave for staying here, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Most visitors leave after hearing the stories. You two seem determined. Ethan laughed it off. We're here for the history, not the ghosts. Thomas didn't smile. Instead, he led them through the mansion, showing them the rooms that had once belonged to the plantation's owners. He paused in front of a large portrait hanging on the wall, a woman with dark, mournful eyes. This is the lady of the house, Thomas said, his voice lowering. But some say her eyes follow you when you walk past, even though the painting hasn't moved in decades. Ethan smirked, clearly unimpressed. Sarah's curiosity was piqued. She asked more about the woman in the painting, and Thomas reluctantly told her the story of Chloe, a former slave who had been wronged by the plantation family and whose spirit still haunted the grounds. As they stood in front of the portrait, a cold breeze blew through the room, making Sarah shiver. She turned toward Ethan, but when she looked back at the painting, she could have sworn the woman's eyes were no longer looking straight ahead. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The room felt too quiet, too still. Ethan was fast asleep beside her, but Sarah kept tossing and turning, her mind racing with the story of Chloe. In the morning, Sarah sat with Thomas again, eager to learn more about the spirit who haunted the Myrtles Plantation. The old caretaker sat across from her, sipping his coffee slowly as he gazed out the window toward the overgrown garden. Chloe was a slave on this plantation, Thomas began. She was the house servant, tasked with looking after the children of the plantation owners. She was young, beautiful, and had a kind heart. She made one mistake that cost her everything. Thomas paused as if weighing the weight of the story. Chloe was caught eavesdropping on her masters. They believed she was spying, trying to uncover their secrets. For that, they accused her of poisoning the family. She didn't poison anyone. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. What happened to her? Thomas sighed deeply. Chloe was framed. The family needed a scapegoat, someone to take the blame for their own dark deeds. They hung her in the yard and left her body to rot as a warning to the other slaves. The room grew cold as Thomas spoke, and Sarah could feel the weight of the story settling in her chest. Chloe didn't die that night. Her spirit lingered, angry, vengeful, and she's been haunting this plantation ever since. Is it true that she still haunts the place? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded grimly. Yes, many people have seen her. Others have heard her whispers, felt her presence. She isn't the only one. The children who died here, many of them remain as restless spirits too. That evening, Sarah and Ethan decided to take a walk around the plantation grounds before dinner. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the moonlight bathed the property in an eerie glow. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the crickets and distant frogs created a haunting symphony. As they walked past the old slave quarters, Sarah felt a strange sensation. It was as if something was watching them, just out of sight. She turned to Ethan, but he didn't seem to notice anything unusual. this place just amazing? Sarah said, trying to push the unease from her mind. Yeah, but something about it feels off, Ethan admitted, his voice uneasy. I can't explain it. They continued to explore, venturing deeper into the plantation. The courtyard in the center of the house was bathed in the pale light of the moon, and the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Suddenly, there was a loud creaking sound from above, followed by a soft thump, as if something or someone was walking across the floor of the plantation house. Sarah froze, her heart racing in her chest. Ethan looked up, confused. Did you hear that? Sarah whispered. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but it's probably just the old house settling. Maybe, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. It didn't sound like that. He stood in silence for a moment, listening to the distant creaks and groans of the house. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed from inside, followed by what sounded like faint laughter, child's laughter. High-pitched and eerie, the air turned icy cold. Later that night, Sarah and Ethan lay in their bed, the unsettling sounds of the plantation keeping them awake. The laughter still echoed in Sarah's mind, making her feel as though something was lurking just beyond the walls of their room. As she lay there in the dark, Sarah heard it again, a faint whisper, as if someone was speaking directly into her ear. Get out! She bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding. Ethan, she cried, shaking him awake. Did you hear that? Ethan rubbed his eyes, groggy from sleep. What are you talking about? Someone whispered my name, Sarah insisted, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her in confusion. You're just hearing things. It's probably just the wind, but Sarah wasn't so sure. She sat up in bed, staring into the darkened room. The whispers seemed to come from somewhere deep within the walls, echoing faintly as though it was trapped inside. Suddenly, the door to their room creaked open, slowly without warning. Neither of them moved as they stared at the darkened doorway. Cold air seemed to rush in, carrying with it the scent of something musty and old. And then, as if from nowhere, the whisper came again, clearer this time. Get out! The next morning, Sarah and Ethan woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside their window, but the eerie feeling from the night before still lingered in the air. The door had creaked open on its own, and Sarah's heart still raced at the thought of the whisper. She tried to shake it off, but something was undeniably wrong about the Myrtles Plantation. I'm not sure about this place anymore, Sarah said as she made her way to the small kitchen to prepare breakfast. Ethan followed her, still half asleep. I thought we came here for history, Ethan replied with a chuckle, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. Are you really letting all this ghost stuff get to you? I'm not scared, Sarah snapped, trying to sound firm. But something is happening here. Last night was too real. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he went to the window and gazed out at the overgrown garden. This place does have a weird vibe, but it's probably all in our heads. Let's just enjoy the day. After breakfast, they decided to explore the grounds again. They ventured deeper into the garden, following a winding path that led them to the back of the mansion. The sun had risen fully, but there was still an eerie chill in the air. As they walked past the old, dilapidated gazebo at the far end of the garden, Sarah heard it. Laughter. It wasn't just any laughter. It was the unmistakable sound of a child giggling, faint but clear. It seemed to come from the direction of the gazebo, and it echoed through the garden in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. Did you hear that? Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with unease. Ethan looked around. Hear what? It's just the wind. No, Sarah said, her voice tense. It's a child, laughing. It's coming from over there. She pointed toward the gazebo. They stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to approach. The sound of laughter grew louder, almost mocking, sending a wave of unease through their bodies. Sarah took a hesitant step toward the gazebo, followed by Ethan, who looked more nervous than before. As they neared the structure, the laughter stopped abruptly, and the air grew colder. They exchanged uneasy glances. You go first, Ethan said, almost sounding like he was joking, but his voice was shaky. With a sigh, Sarah stepped inside the gazebo. The floorboards creaked under her weight. She called out softly, Hello? Is anyone here? The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the distance. Then something caught her eye. On the far side of the gazebo, beneath a broken window frame, was a small, dusty toy, a wooden rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded with age. Sarah bent down to examine it. The wooden horse was carved with delicate detail, but it was covered in a layer of dust, almost as if it had been untouched for decades. As she reached for it, feeling of being watched returned, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Suddenly, there was a soft tap on her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. Her heart raced as she stepped back toward Ethan. I don't think we should stay here, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Ethan was pale, his eyes wide. "I don't like this. Let's get back to the house." As they turned to leave, the laughter returned. But this time it was louder, closer. It was as though the child was right behind them. Sarah's pulse quickened as she looked over her shoulder. There was nothing there. They rushed back to the main house, their footsteps quick and panicked. The laughter faded into the background as they finally reached the safety of the porch. "I don't know what's going on here," Ethan muttered, his voice shaking. "I don't want to find out." Sarah stood in front of him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This place is alive. Something is here, and it's not just ghosts. It feels like it's trying to warn us." After their unsettling experience in the garden, Sarah and Ethan spent the rest of the day inside, avoiding the strange noises and unsettling feelings that seemed to follow them. They tried to distract themselves with some of the historical details about the plantation, but it was hard to focus. The memory of the child's laughter haunted Sarah's thoughts. That evening, they decided to seek answers from Thomas, the old caretaker. He had been more than just a guide. They both felt there was something deeper about his connection to the place. They found Thomas in the guest lounge, sitting by the fireplace with a book in his hands. His eyes were distant, and there was a weariness to him that made Sarah uneasy. "Thomas," she said softly, walking up to him, "we need to talk." He looked up from his book, his eyes clouded with concern. "What's on your mind?" We heard things," Sarah said. "Things we can't explain. A child's laughter, whispers in the dark. It feels like something is trying to get our attention." Thomas stiffened. He closed his book slowly, as if gathering his thoughts. "You heard the laughter?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Ethan replied, his tone serious. "What does it mean?" Thomas hesitated before speaking. "There are stories, old stories, that go beyond what's written in the history books. This plantation was built on a foundation of suffering. Spirits here aren't just trapped or angry." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "Why the laughter? Why the children?" Thomas's face grew pale as he leaned forward. "The children who died here, many of them never left. They were innocent, and their souls are restless. There's one spirit in particular." "Chloe." "Chloe?" Sarah repeated, her curiosity piqued. Thomas nodded. "Chloe was the slave who was wrongfully accused of poisoning the family. But her death wasn't the end of her torment. It said that her spirit seeks to use the children's souls to carry out her revenge, to keep the cycle of anger and pain going." Before Sarah could respond, the door to the lounge slammed shut. Both she and Ethan turned in shock, but when they rushed to open it, it wouldn't budge. "Thomas," Sarah said, panic rising in her chest. "What's going on?" Thomas didn't answer. He was staring at the door, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Thomas," Ethan said again, his voice now full of alarm. But there was no response. A sudden, loud thump echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. The sound of the child's laughter echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls like an unholy chant. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest, and the air in the room grew thick, as though something oppressive was closing in around them. Ethan, standing just a few feet away, was equally unnerved, his face ashen as he glanced at Thomas, who stood frozen in place, his eyes wide with fear. "Thomas," Sarah whispered, taking a cautious step toward him. He didn't respond. Ethan pushed forward, reaching out to shake Thomas's shoulder. "Thomas, what's happening? Talk to us." Thomas remained still, his eyes locked on the door, his lips barely moving, as if he were silently reciting something under his breath. The room felt colder now, colder than it had been moments before, and a thin mist seemed to be seeping in through the cracks in the walls. And without warning, Thomas's voice broke the silence, barely audible. "You shouldn't have come here. No one should stay. It's coming for you. It always comes for those who dare to listen." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She could see the fear in Thomas's eyes, something she hadn't noticed before, and it made her question everything she thought she understood about the plantation. But before she could ask him any more questions, there was a loud bang at the door. The door to the guest lounge shuddered violently, as if something, or someone, was pounding on it from the other side. Sarah recoiled in shock, her breath catching in her throat. "We need to leave now," Ethan urged, his voice shaking. He rushed to the door, pulling on the handle. It refused to budge. "Why won't it open?" Sarah said frantically, her hands trembling as she pulled on the doorknob. "It's locked. We're trapped in here." Thomas's eyes widened in alarm. He suddenly snapped out of his trance-like state and moved toward the far corner of the room. "Get away from the door," he shouted. "It won't open while it's here." Sound of footsteps, light and quick, echoed on the other side of the door. Then came the soft, muffled voice of a child, barely above a whisper. play with me." Sarah's breath hitched as she felt an icy gust of wind sweep through the room, extinguishing the flames in the fireplace. Temperature plummeted. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her back from the door. "We need to get out of here, now! Something's wrong, and we're not safe." As they moved toward the windows, desperate to find another way out, the door suddenly burst open with an ear-piercing crash. When they looked toward the entrance, there was no one there. "Where did they go?" Sarah muttered, looking around the room in confusion. Standing near the door was a large, ornate mirror. In the reflection, they could see Thomas, still frozen in place. He was no longer alone. Standing beside him in the mirror was a shadowy figure. A tall, pale woman with dark eyes and a malicious smile. "Chloe," Sarah whispered, recognizing the figure from the stories. The reflection in the mirror began to distort, the woman's smile stretching unnaturally wide, and her hands slowly reached out toward the two of them. As the reflection of Chloe advanced, Sarah turned around, expecting to find the woman standing in front of them. But there was nothing, just emptiness. "She's here," Ethan said in a strained voice. "We need to get out, now!" He turned back to the window, but as they pulled back the heavy curtains, they froze. The view outside the window was not the same. Instead of the overgrown garden, the view was replaced with a dark, misty void, like they were looking into an abyss. Their surroundings had shifted. Then, without warning, Thomas's voice echoed again, louder this time, like an unnatural growl. "You cannot leave. You are already part of the curse." Loud thuds shook the room, and the mist around the window thickened, almost as though it was creeping inside. The temperature dropped even further, and Sarah's breath formed visible clouds in the air. Ethan turned to her, his face stricken with panic. "We're stuck. We have to break out, now!" Ethan shouted, his voice shaking. Sarah, her heart racing, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy chair, and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered on impact. Instead of breaking out, the shards seemed to float and twist in midair. The mist began to gather around them, its tendrils reaching out, creeping across the floor like a living thing. Suddenly, a deafening crash sounded behind them. They turned just in time to see Thomas, now in an entirely different form, standing in the doorway. His once familiar face was distorted, his features twisted in agony. His eyes were completely black, devoid of any humanity. His body seemed to be contorted unnaturally, as though he was being pulled in different directions by some invisible force. "You should have listened," Thomas's voice rasped from his twisted form. His shadow of Chloe seemed to loom behind him, her eyes glowing with a vengeful fire. Her laughter, the same child's laugh they had heard earlier, sounded from all directions, echoing through the room and filling their minds with dread. Panic surged through Sarah as she felt the pull of something invisible tugging at her. "We have to get out of here. Please, Ethan. We have to do something." Ethan's face was pale as he stared at the distorted figure of Thomas, now entirely consumed by the curse. He grabbed Sarah's hand, and together they rushed toward the shattered window. But as they neared it, the mist thickened even further, blocking their way. And just as all hope seemed lost, a single word broke through the darkness. "Run!" It wasn't Thomas's voice. It wasn't Chloe's voice either. It was a soft, soothing voice, so faint, so delicate, that it barely reached their ears. Somehow, they both heard it clearly. The voice felt like a lifeline. Without a second thought, they turned toward the door and sprinted toward it, ignoring the chaos around them. But the instant they crossed the threshold, the mist suddenly dissipated, and they found themselves outside, standing on the front porch of the mansion. Everything was silent. The garden was eerily still, and the once ominous mist had vanished completely. They turned to look at the house, half expecting it to reach out for them. The mansion was no longer shrouded in the same darkness. It was just an old, abandoned plantation house, just like it had been before. The voices, the laughter, and the dark figure of Chloe were still in their minds, haunting them as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Ethan said, still looking around, his hand clutching hers tightly. "But we're free for now. The curse, it's still here, but we're not trapped anymore." But as they stood there staring at the mansion one last time, they couldn't shake the feeling that the Myrtles Plantation was watching them, and that even though they had escaped, something darker than they could understand was still waiting for them. Cold night air whipped around Sarah and Ethan as they stood in front of the Myrtles Plantation, their hearts still pounding from their narrow escape. But despite the eerie calmness that surrounded them, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The house, now devoid of the mist and whispers, stood like a silent sentinel. Silent, but ominous. I don't understand, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. We were trapped, Ethan. The mist, the voices. We were going to die in there. And then it stopped, just like that. Like someone or something let us go. Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Did the curse of the Myrtles Plantation truly have ended? Was the danger over? Or was something darker waiting for them, just out of sight? We need to go back. We need to find out what happened, Ethan said, his voice determined. But we've just escaped, Sarah protested, her voice filled with fear. What if it follows us? What if it's waiting for us outside? It's not just going to let us go that easily. Ethan looked back at the plantation house, now shrouded in darkness. I don't think it's over. We need answers, and we're not leaving until we get them. With no other choice, Sarah reluctantly agreed, and they made their way back to the front door, which now swung open as if inviting them in. They stepped inside, where the silence was suffocating. The atmosphere in the house felt different. The oppressive heaviness that had plagued them before had lifted, but it had been replaced by a deep, unsettling calm. They moved cautiously through the grand hallway, each creak of the wooden floorboards sending a shockwave of fear through their bodies. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A faint whisper from somewhere deep within the house. It was the voice of a child. Come play with me. Both Sarah and Ethan froze, their bodies stiffening in terror. The voice wasn't just coming from the walls, it was all around them. They turned to face the source of the voice, but all they could see was a darkened hallway leading to a distant door. Then, as if compelled by some unseen force, they found themselves walking toward it. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls seemed to pulse as if alive. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as they entered the room at the end of the hallway. Inside, they were confronted by a sight that took their breath away. The room was filled with old furniture, cobwebs, and dust. Nothing unusual for an abandoned house. But it was the large, ornate mirror in the center of the room that held their attention. It was the same mirror they had seen in the guest room earlier, the one that reflected Chloe's twisted image, and now it was glowing with an eerie light. Ethan slowly approached the mirror, his hand trembling. As he reached out to touch it, the reflection in the glass shifted. Instead of their own faces staring back, he saw the face of a woman, pale with hollow eyes, her mouth twisted in a cruel smile. It was Chloe. You shouldn't have come here, her voice echoed, a mix of sadness and malice. Before they could react, the mirror shimmered and rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. The reflection of Chloe began to reach out of the glass, her pale fingers curling toward them. No! Sarah screamed, pulling Ethan away, but it was too late. The ground beneath their feet gave way as the room seemed to collapse around them. They fell, tumbling into darkness, their screams swallowed by the void. When Sarah opened her eyes, she found herself in a completely different place. Gone were the grand rooms of the plantation house, replaced by an old, dilapidated graveyard. The air was thick with fog, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Ethan, she called out, her voice quivering. Her heart raced as she stumbled to her feet, desperately looking around. It was then that she saw him, Ethan, standing by a weathered tombstone. Something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes glazed over, and his body was completely still. Ethan, please, talk to me. Sarah ran toward him, shaking him violently. Suddenly he turned toward her, his eyes now completely black, just like Thomas's had been earlier. His mouth opened, but it wasn't his voice that came out. You should have never come back. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward. The voice was the same. It was Chloe's voice, cold and filled with an eerie sadness. No, this can't be real, Sarah cried out, backing away from Ethan's twisted form. Ethan, please wake up! The figure before her was not Ethan anymore. It was Chloe, using his body as a vessel to torment her. He never left, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it seemed to echo all around them. Curse never leaves. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she collapsed to her knees. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. We didn't know. We didn't understand. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in front of her, blinding her momentarily. When the light faded, she found herself back in the main hall of the plantation house. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and there was no sign of Ethan. In the distance, she heard a voice. Sarah! It was Ethan's voice. But this time, it wasn't corrupted. It was calm. It was real. Sarah turned, and there he was, alive, standing in the doorway. Before she could run to him, Chloe's reflection appeared in the mirror once again. This is not over, she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. You can never escape what you've unleashed. Just as Sarah moved a step forward, the house seemed to collapse around her. The walls groaned, and the ground began to shake. The mirrors shattered, and the darkness closed in. And then, suddenly, silence, miracle end. Sarah found herself standing outside the plantation once more, the morning sun rising behind her. The plantation house, which had been a source of torment and fear, now stood still and silent, as though it had never been haunted. Behind her, Ethan appeared, alive and well, his eyes clear, his face full of relief. "We're free," he whispered. But as Sarah turned back to face the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker, more ancient, was still lurking within its walls. Yet for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. As she and Ethan walked away, the door to the plantation house slowly creaked shut, locking the past away. It was over. For now. The end.